So my friends in faith, my fellow lovers of the land of the Holy One, I am Bishop John Harvey Taylor, and I'd like to welcome you all to St. Paul's Commons on the afternoon of the first Sunday in Lent. Just to remind us all who happen to be following the Christian way of one of the promises that we made on Ash Wednesday, if we made it to church. We acknowledged on Ash Wednesday that Lent is a time for study and for learning. And study and learning are what we have in store today in ample measure, thanks to our three distinguished speakers. I'd like to ask how many who are here so far have made their pilgrimage to Israel and Palestine? Now, Canon Iyad calls us all what? Cousins. We call him our cousin. We call him our sibling. Either way, several months ago, I learned from our fellow cousin and sibling of Iyad, who goes by the name of Lorraine Reeder in the Diocese of Connecticut, that Iyad would be making a world tour. Now, more about this in the second half of our evening, but the Gaza war has decimated the Palestinian economy, which is highly dependent, I think we all know because we've been there, on pilgrimages and on tourism. So when I heard from Lorraine that Iyad was going to be on the road around the Episcopal Church, it struck us as an opportunity to maybe bring the homeland, the Holy Land, home to us. Perhaps recruit some future pilgrims or recruit some return pilgrims. Now, before we go much further, I'd like to invite us to pause and join in showing our appreciation to Lorraine, who is not here, she's in Connecticut, as well as to Chef Tim and to Canon for Common Life, Bob Williams, for all their help in today's arrangement. But before we get, during and after dinner, to Iyad's pilgrim story, owing to a strong interest that I know from the conversation swirling around this afternoon, we all share an interest in contemporary issues in the region, and Canon Iyad has been a teacher for many of us. We took the opportunity to invite Joumana and Bill to join him for a broader conversation about the contemporary Christian experience in three Arab countries. Now, just a few notes about our time together today. We'll take 80 or 90 minutes for our panel discussion, including your questions. Chef Tim has provided snacks at each table. There are beverages available as well over against the window. We'll break for dinner and fellowship starting around 5:30. Then at about 6:15, we'll invite Iyad to get back up again. He's working hard today to begin his keynote remarks. He's going to take us back to Israel and Palestine. Depending on your questions and Iyad's answers, our plan is to adjourn about 7:30 or 8. Restrooms are through the doors most of you came in through. Walk toward the windows with the beautiful view of Echo Park Lake. Just before you get to the windows, turn to your left, or also through double doors on our right. There's a single all-gender restroom on that end. Now, a word about our panelists. Joumana Silyan-Saba is Director of Policy and Discrimination Enforcement for the City of Los Angeles' Civil and Human Rights and Equity Department. She's a member of a Syrian Christian family, and she's a specialist in conflict resolution who has trained United States diplomats and even had the opportunity to brief Vice President Biden in 2015. Canon Bob and I have worked with Joumana closely over the last few years, and especially since October 7, 2023, when Hamas attacked Israel. When it did so and Israel responded, the brutal war drove a wedge into interfaith relationships everywhere, especially in our community between Jews and Arabs. Watching Joumana's work, which is a kind of a ministry, we can attest that she's been a calm, caring, wise voice for conflict resolution and reconciliation in our community. She does stress that today she will be speaking in her personal capacity and not on behalf of the city of Los Angeles. The Reverend Canon Bill Schwartz, to Joumana's right, represents a nonprofit called Stand with Iraqi Christians. He's a retired archdeacon of the Anglican Diocese of Cyprus and the Gulf and dean of St. Christopher's Cathedral, Manama, Bahrain. Canon Bill is a specialist on the Christian community in Iraq. A few weeks ago, coincidentally, I had the blessing of a briefing from some of Canon Bill's colleagues at Stand with Iraqi Christians. We had been thinking that very week about plans for this event. So with her impeccable timing, the Holy Spirit revealed that Bill, the organization's San Diego-based board member, would be an ideal panelist. And Canon Iyad, founder of This Day Together, most important, also founder of Qumri Pilgrimages, a former aide to the Episcopal Bishop of Jerusalem, and a member of a Palestinian Arab Christian family from East Jerusalem. In 2008, Bishop Bruno made Iyad a canon of our diocese. He's a world-renowned pilgrim and presario who has led thousands, if not possibly tens of thousands, perhaps Iyad knows the number, on visits to holy sites in Israel and Palestine, bringing history alive while giving each pilgrim the opportunity to learn about contemporary issues. On his current sold-out world tour, Iyad has already appeared at events in Connecticut, thanks to Lorraine. After Los Angeles, it's on to the Diocese of Colorado, and then home to await the birth of his and Simone's first grandchild. Thank you. Yes, as journalists say, I buried the lead. In the order in which our panelists have been introduced, they have agreed to offer their opening remarks on the situation in which Christians find themselves in the contemporary scene politically in Syria, Iraq, and Palestine, respectively. Joumana, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Bishop Taylor. First, I want to wish everybody a blessed Lenten season. May your prayers be accepted. It is an honor to be with you today. I've known Bishop Taylor, and Bob, and we've worked together, so thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be on this esteemed panel. So I'll just sort of start with painting the picture a little bit in terms of the Middle East. My family left. I was born in Aleppo, Syria. I grew up in Aleppo. My father's side of the family is of Armenian heritage, and that's largely how his family landed in Aleppo due to the Armenian genocide. I grew up in Aleppo, and at age 15, my family moved to the U.S., so I very much I'm an American. I very much feel a personal identity as an Angelino, but I certainly can't leave my origins and the origins of my identity of where I grew up, which is a very important part of the identity and affinity for many of the Christians from that region. Historically, and it sounds like many of you in the room have been to the Holy Land and have at least visited the region and sort of have a sense and a flavor for the region. But historically, the identity of Christianity in that region is very much intertwined in the land. It is the cradle of Christianity, having its formation back into, the first foundation of Christianity, quite frankly, that spread into Damascus and where Lebanon is today. So the identity of Christians is very much a part of who we are as an affinity, as a connection to the land, but truly as a connection to the faith in and of itself. Historically, as sort of the presence of Christians and Christianity dwindled, and truly going back in history into sort of the Ottoman Empire, we can find those traces. I mean, I spoke briefly about the Armenian genocide, but it was only the Armenians. There was mass scale of killing of Christians, and that led to a tremendous exodus. And we see that theme of exodus of Christians from the Middle East over the years. I'll speak about Syria in particular. I think the number of Syrian Christians left in the region is about, 2%? very tiny minority at the moment, and that is compared to about 10% roughly 10 years ago. And that number dwindled even more, because I remember even growing up in Syria, in Aleppo where I grew up, I have Jesuit upbringing, which is sort of the early formation and foundation of my understanding of social justice come from that sort of Jesuit foundation. But even then, growing up as a Christian in that part of the world, there is a tremendous affinity. And even in growing up in the region, the relationships as we developed with neighbors, we were all Syrians. It's sort of your religious identity was the source of your faith and how you lived your life. But there was also an affinity, a national affinity of being part of that world, which unfortunately, and sort of bringing us back to the context of where we are today, and seeing the region sort of descend into sectarian violence and sectarian war has truly been just gut-wrenching, especially for those of us from the region, to even watch that unfold. For us, Christmas wasn't about presents. You went to midnight mass on Christmas, Holy Week, Good Friday, every store shut down as Christians went from church to church. It didn't matter if you were Muslim, it didn't matter what you were, you just shut down in respect of your neighbor. And that was the relationship. Unfortunately, and I still have some family in Damascus. I no longer have family in Aleppo. They just mass exodus. But today, Syria in particular is facing tremendous challenges on all fronts. It's facing challenge as a country in and of itself as it transitions, not only transitioning in the normal sense of transition, but truly moving from an authoritarian regime. For me, when we speak about democracy, it is holy. It is holy because I know what it's like to live in an authoritarian regime. I grew up as a child being told not to speak in public, not to speak on the phone, not to speak in the cab. So when the Patriot Act came out, you could just sort of imagine the thoughts that went through people that experienced these kinds of things. So today, moving kind of from that authoritarian regime into a new authority that's in place, there is a lot of uncertainty and fear, particularly for the minority groups. Syria has a number of minority groups, not only Christians, but we have Druze and Yazidis and Kurds, and even within the Muslim umbrella, there are different sects within Islam. And I don't know if any of you are keeping up with the news over the last week or so. There's just been a tremendous violence unfolding, unfortunately, with about 1,000 people killed within the last week, primarily due to sectarian divides. And of course, for the Christians, I have some family, and guess what? When we call, all they say, we're doing very good, we're great. They can't tell me much over the phone, and they're not going to. But we know the reality of the fear that they live in. But I don't want to leave it on the note of fear, and I want to give an opportunity to my fellow panelists to also chime in. There's always this point of hope. And the point of hope is, how do we transition? How do we move forward from the chaos, the conflict? And I think being in this room today, the conversations that we're having here today, is truly what gives me hope. Because unless we can have these conversations and truly dig deeply into where things are and why they are as they are today, that we can collectively find a way that we can help each other forward and out of the unfortunate realities that the Middle East continue to experience, both socially as well as politically. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm sure we'll talk some more about that, and we'll unpack it a little bit more.
Thank you, Joumana. So moving to Iraq with Canon Bill.
I do want to say, this is on. Hello? Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Is that better? Yes. Okay, thank you. I do want to say thank you, Bishop John, for the opportunity to be here. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about the Christians in Iraq. Let me say, my great-grandfather on my mother's side came to the United States from Syria, which I didn't know until I was living in Egypt, but it's another story. I went to Egypt in 1972 for 3 months. I retired a couple of years ago. And I'm learning how to live in America. And I'm learning about the Episcopal Church, which is different from the rest of the Anglican Communion. It's a great opportunity to learn a lot of things. Part of my responsibility as Archdeacon in the British context of Archdeacon, which is a legal role in the way the church works in England and part of the Anglican Communion, was I was responsible for government relations, church property, appointment of clergy, these kinds of things in the countries of Iraq and the countries of the Arabian Peninsula. Always exciting. And when I talk to people about the Middle East, it's very interesting to get an idea of what do they think Middle East? Most people would include Jerusalem, maybe Lebanon and Syria, maybe Egypt. But they really didn't go any farther west or east, partly because our sense of church history doesn't go east. And that's a real handicap for American Christians, I would say. The church began in Iraq the same way it began in the book of Acts. Apostles went east as well as west. They started where there was a Jewish population. You remember about the Babylonian Talmud? Okay, the Jewish population still had a very strong identity in the area which is now Iraq. But Christianity took root very quickly, and it came into existence in a church that was alienated from the Western church at the Council of Chalcedon. And so we don't know much about them. But that church still worships in Aramaic, which is the language Jesus used. And there is a major differentiation that came about after the Crusades where a number became politically affiliated with the West because it was advantageous, and so they became Catholics. One of the Uniate Catholic churches, the Chaldean Catholic Church. So you have the Assyrian Orthodox Church and the Chaldean Catholic Church, which makes up Christianity. And during Saddam's time, they prospered. Saddam was very good about minority groups and things like that because he came from a minority group, much like Syria. But ever since Saddam's fall, it's been more difficult for all of the different minority groups to get along with each other. And the smaller the group, the more difficult it is. And so Christians have not suffered from persecution against Christians, but they have found life difficult. And then Daesh, or ISIS, came into being. And Daesh formed its identity in the area which is historically Christian. Nineveh, that whole northwestern area which borders Syria and Turkey. And so the Christians suffered seriously. And what was a couple million Christians in Iraq 10 years ago has dwindled to about 250,000. Many of them left. They fled the violence of Daesh to Lebanon, to Jordan. Some came here. Quite a few went to Germany and France. There's nothing to go home to because there's no economy. It's not because they feel persecuted. It's they have no sense of where is the future for us and our children. And so, I mean, I'll just do a little plug for Stand With Iraqi Christians. What we're trying to do is create that kind of economic future. We're doing small business loans, things like this, to give Iraqi Christians a hope for the future. Because the only good job to get is a government job. okay, for lots of reasons, but you don't get a government job unless you've got somebody in the government who's going to recommend you, and that's all family-based. So unless you've got a Christian in a government ministry, medicine, education, whatever it be, then you're not going to get a job in your field. So this is the kind of thing that Iraqi Christians face. But down to 250,000, these are the hardcore Iraqi Christians. They're not leaving. This is their land. And I mean, just earlier yesterday, I had a conversation with a brother of the Prime Minister who was very, very concerned about the Christians exiting the country, because the Christians have always been educated professionals, the engineers, the doctors, and the country's looking to try to attract them back. Now, the image you get in the media is, of course, there's a lot of fighting, there's a lot of disruption, the economy's a mess, corruption is horrible. But the people who live on the ground, they understand that they need each other. And there is hope for those who want to work hard, who are willing, I won't say to suffer, but to not have particular advantages like they used to have under Saddam's time. So where's the future of the church in Iraq? In the people of Iraq. They desperately need help from the rest of the world. And frankly, they're looking for help from the United States, because most of them blame the United States for their economic problems. But that's a political discussion. If you've been paying attention to what's been going on in Iraq since 1990, 91, and then again in 2003, you get a sense that Iraq has not been allowed to exist as a country. There's been too many foreign influences. These are the kinds of things which the Iraqi people feel that's the reason for their lack of hope. But what we are trying to do is instill that hope in them, not hope from outside. And if you're going to think about and pray for the people of Iraq, all of them, not just the Christians, what we need to pray for is stability, for the idea of multifaceted society, rather than ethnic groups all taking. If you go to Lebanon, I'm a Maronite Lebanon. I'm a Shia Lebanese. I'm a Sunni Lebanese. Similarly in Syria. Somewhat similarly in the Holy Land. Same problem in Iraq. People don't see themselves as citizens of a country as much as they see themselves as belonging to this or that community. I should probably just clarify, Iraq's borders have nothing to do with Iraq's history. Okay? That was a World War I Sykes-Picot agreement for the benefit of the British and the French economies. And so it should not be hard to understand that these different ethnic people groups, nations, in the sense of the biblical word nations, these people groups were never a nation in the political sense that we think of it. But the history there, religious history, is absolutely rich. I can show you Job's tomb. I can take you to Babylon, to Ur of the Chaldees. We forget how important that area is in our history and our understanding of our relationship with God. So don't forget that Iraq's part of the picture, please. Frankly, in a completely different way, so is Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. This country very much depends on its relationships with all of those. It's not an easy thing. And the existence of the church in these countries is one of the best ways for them to understand. Not because we're trying to convert them, but we're presenting a culture based on different values, different ethics. And because we live in that sphere, in their midst, it is a Christian witness. I'll leave that for us to move on. I welcome questions.
Thank you, Canon Bill. And now finally, Canon Iyad, take us to Palestine.
Thank you, thank you. I just want to thank you, Bishop John Taylor, for giving me this opportunity to be with my friends, and I can say more, my cousins. And I want to thank all your staff for arranging all of this, and I know how much it takes so much planning. So thank you, thank you. This comes from the bottom of my heart. Before I tell you a little bit about Palestine or Israel and the Christians that live in the Holy Land, I've been blessed for almost 25 to 30 years to lead pilgrimages. And as Bishop said, I led thousands, and I'm sorry I don't remember you all. I fake it sometimes, you know? And many times it works, all right? So forgive me if I don't remember. So I started my new line. Remind me what year, who did you come with, and so on, you know? I started in Connecticut. It was amazing how they welcomed me. Truly, truly, I felt the love. It's unreal. It's hard to imagine. And it gives me power every time I see this. Same would be with you, people. And I just want to share something before I talk about my country, is that the reason I'm here, especially in Los Angeles, it's because of one couple that started everything in this area. And this couple did so much for us as family, plus bringing so many pilgrims. They started with small 4s or 5 and 6, and they never gave up hope. And I just want to thank Sue and Sandy. Of course, Sandy. Sandy would be very, very proud if he was around us now. And I just want to thank you. You know, the difference between what my colleagues shared here is that Christianity started in my own country. And it started in a city called Bethlehem, as all of you know. And unfortunately, the Christians are leaving. And the main reason for Christians leaving, it's because of occupation. And many, many times, for even the ones who came with me, as much as I try, I want to educate as many, not to make you take sides, people. It's how can we make this more work? And unfortunately, we're going from bad to worse. It's not getting easy. And just to give you an idea, in Bethlehem in the 1920s, it used to be 90% Christian. Can you imagine? 90. That's a big number, and that's how it should be. I mean, that's where it all began. Then, as you know, in 1948, Israel was founded, and the numbers went down from 90 to 60%. And then another war takes place. And if you remember, that war was so short. It was called the Six-Day War, where the Arab countries lost. If you remember, the Syrians lost the Golan Heights. Egypt lost the Sinai Peninsula. Jordan lost the West Bank. And so because of that war, more Christians left. And so it dropped down to 30% in 1967. Then if you go back with history, we have 2 intifadas. Intifada number 1, which is uprising, was in 1987. And in 1987, a jeep of soldiers went over a van at that time that carried Palestinian workers in Gaza Strip. And that's what sparked that intifada. And it sparked, and it went all over the West Bank. And more Christians left. Second intifada was when Sharon was the Israeli prime minister, and he, the one that did not believe in the Oslo Agreement. And I would like to talk more about it after dinner. I got the map up there, and I want to talk a bit why this thing is not working before I take you on a virtual pilgrimage in the Holy Land. And So Sharon did not believe in the Oslo Agreement. And what to do is you go to the most holy site for Muslims, and that's called the Dome of the Rock. And that's what sparked the second Intifada. And that's when all of the West heard about it. The first one, nobody heard about. You know why? Because it was burning tires, throwing stones on cars. But the second one was so serious because suicide bombers were coming out. Imagine to brainwash teenagers that you can go to heaven by strapping a bomb around your waist and go into and kill innocent people. So that also caused more and more Christians to leave. So today, unfortunately, if you talk about Bethlehem, it's only 16% Christian. 16. Our largest denomination as Christians, it's Greek Orthodox. That's the mother church. You know, every time you talk about the patriarch of Jerusalem, you know, because there's more than one. But the main one, it's the mother church, and that is the Greek Orthodox. Second comes Roman Catholics, and then other denominations, like we have Armenians, we have Roman Catholics, we have Assyrians, we have Copts, and among them also we have Anglicans or Episcopalians, and I'm one of them. I've been guiding Episcopalians for the last 17 years, and I survived. You know, the beauty of Episcopal Church, it's when you get a bishop, and the bishop introduces you to more bishops, and then you get to know more priests, and it opens many, many doors, and that's how I started it. And thank God now I have my family that is on my side, and they are helping in the business. As you heard, we're expecting a baby girl, so we're very, very excited. I was supposed to go for a whole month of March, and then when I was working with Lorraine. Too bad she's not here. Truly, she's the one that fixed everything for me. So Lorraine is behind everything. And her name is Lorraine Reeder. My wife comes to me and she says, "You're leaving the whole month of March?" I said, "Yeah." And she goes, "You better be back before the 20th of March." "The baby is due the last week of March." I said, "Yes, dear." So after visiting here, I'm going straight to Colorado and then straight home. And so we cannot wait for that baby to be born. People, occupation is not a nice word. And I'm sure most of you are so eager to know about what's happening in Gaza Strip. You know, in Gaza, it's a very, very small strip. And I put the map up there. I know some of you in the back, you cannot see it, but you can come and take a look at it later. Just think of 28 miles by 14 miles with 2.4 million people, among them 1,000 Christians. There are Christians that live there. I remember one anchor in Israel, they were on TV, and she goes, "Christians bombed? There's no such thing as Christians." She's from Israel. And they were arguing, and she said, "No, there are Christians, and some of them being shot or bombed and killed." So Christians are treated exactly as anyone else when it comes to the political situation. So Christians leave because, first of all, we don't have large families. That's why you feel the percentage, you know? But if you go and make a research, you're going to find out Muslims do the same. They want to look for a better future. People, what kind of future are you going to put if you live within walls or barriers or fences? And that's what's happening in the district of Bethlehem by itself. You know, it consists of 3 major areas like Beit Jala, Bethlehem, and Beit Sahor. 160,000 people live there. And they cannot get to Jerusalem. And you know, when I say Bethlehem to Jerusalem, you will be shocked to know it's only 7 miles away, you know? 7 miles. And I'll share with you a story that happened just in January. We had 10 bishops who visited us, and Bishop Taylor is the man, to be honest, that he is the one behind it. He gave me the idea when we were at the General Convention in Louisville and said, "Iyad, what if I bring 8 to 10 bishops and be with you in solidarity?" I said, "That's great." So he started it, and we started writing to all these bishops. But something came up, Bishop Taylor couldn't make it. But when these 10 bishops came, we wanted to go to Bethlehem to celebrate Christmas in Bethlehem for the Orthodox, which is on January 6th. So Bishop Hussam, my bishop, you know, he was supposed to be with us. And so, but we went ahead of him because we had a bus at that time, and so he was following with his car. And when we reached the checkpoint at Bethlehem, guess what? It was shut down, closed. I mean, who on earth would close Bethlehem on Christmas Eve? People, that's what kind of suffering we get. Of course, there's many ways to get in, but instead of doing it in 10 minutes, it took an hour and 10 minutes because you got to go and find the windy ways and so on. So this is happening, unfortunately, in the West Bank these days. So all the focus is going on Gaza Strip, but guess what? The action is taking place in the West Bank that none of you or many don't understand what is really happening in the West Bank. And so like Nablus, this morning I received a text from my friend sending a short video from Borkin. Some of you been to Borkin, remember? So we had to drive through Jenin, which is on the news always, right? Refugee camp. Do you really need tanks and drones to destroy a half-a-mile refugee camp? It's half a mile. But they show you like as if there's no army. I mean, I don't understand it. And many times I say, where is the world? Why nobody's talking about it? Why no one stands with us? Not only you as Americans, that's a different story. I have something to share with you later. But so truly, nobody's saying nothing to Israel. What Hamas did on October 7th, people, it's terrible. I will never agree with what they did, to kidnap babies and kill them. And there's no such thing to justify it, you know? But how come we cannot justify the killing also of the 160,000, you know? About 60,000 already been dead, you know? And then the rest are injured, and I don't know, God knows how many under the rebels are still under. And imagine what's happening now. It's in the heart of the West Bank, people. It's between Jenin, between Nablus, between Tubas, goes even near Ramallah area, you know? And so what I'm getting to is that the man who takes care of the church, his name is Mu'in, and some of you met him. His daughter got graduated, and he was so excited. She was graduated from the Arab American University, which is in Zababdi, and some of you also even worshipped with us when we went to Zababdi, which is one of the village, or a town, I should say, that has good percentage of Christians. You know, can you imagine? 50% Christian, 50% Muslim. And that's high. And that's what we need you. We need you to keep those people in that area. And so St. Matthew's Church is there. It's thriving. But now with the checkpoints all around, did you know that Israel put over 900 checkpoints? 900. I have a map, which I'll show you later. It has all these checkpoints. So danger, there are certain areas that I wouldn't take you. So if you come today with me, I will take you on a full pilgrimage, but with an exception of going to Borkin or going to Jacob's Well. And so it's only certain areas. But for example, the ones who came and had dinner with us in Jericho, remember our home? I will take you there. But I don't know when you're going to come back to Jerusalem. You know why? Because there's a checkpoint there. And that checkpoint, it can be 15 minutes. It can be no checkpoint. My wife was there this morning. And she said, yeah, there was no checkpoint. She's excited. She's excited, no checkpoint. But can you imagine? So my biggest worry when I have an American group, it's because you are a little spoiled in a way. Sorry, I'm sorry to say that. And so my worry is that I'm going to put you on a bus and bring you and make you sit on a checkpoint for 3 hours. And you know what hurts? After you stand for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour or 2 hours, and you get to the checkpoint, and you know what they do? They just look at you and say, go. Where's safety and where is security with that? So that's a little thing about, I don't know how much you want me to go with. So.
Thank you, yeah?
Yeah, okay.
There'll be more opportunities.
I'll share with you more. I mean, you know, but
So, Joumana, we've talked a little bit about the work you do in ecumenical interfaith settings in Los Angeles. Los Angeles can be fractious, but thanks to the kind of leadership that you help provide, we also find moments of kind of clarity and comity. And as you look at Syria, as it stands on the brink of some new future that you probably can't predict, but you probably have some heart for hoping about, is there anything you've learned about the way people can come together across difference in our setting here that might inform part of the future in Syria?
Thank you for that question. I think you would all see sort of the running theme on this panel of mass exodus and mass migration. And when that happens, people don't just leave their identities behind. They come with that identity. They come with that grounding. They come with that faith. I recently read a book, and if any of you are interested, I would highly recommend that book. It's called What We Remember Will Be Saved. And it is stories of those who have been forced out of their homelands, whether that was in Iraq or Syria. So the book tells their own personal stories of that, the unknown of where they are going. And that is very much the story of many of the Eastern Christians who have settled in the US. Christianity is not a Western concept. And so there is also a connection with not just the identity, but the language. And I think it was sort of mentioned with both of the panelists on this panel, this notion of the ancient languages that are being preserved, whether that's the Aramaic, Syriac. I attend a Maronite church. My husband is Maronite. I taught Sunday school. And we celebrate Mass. Part of our celebration is largely in that Syriac language because there is an aspect of that preservation. And I think in thinking deeply about my own identity and being very much grounded in that identity, that's sort of where I get my strength to do the work that we do together. Because I have to be grounded. And what grounds me is truly my faith. It's this notion of the Prince of Peace, and blessed are the peacemakers, and love your enemy. These are very complex constructs. I struggle with them on a daily basis. But that almost sort of became my sort of personal journey of wanting to truly understand what it really means. What does peace mean, right? And for me, peace isn't just giving up who I am. It is bringing who I am fully to the table, but also bringing it with thoughtfulness and empathy and seeing the person next to me as a fellow human being, and that is my starting point. I think it's really, for LA, we take pride on being one of the most religiously diverse countries in the world, right? But even the constructs of religious pluralism, they are interpreted differently, right? And I'm not gonna go down that rabbit hole, but what I will say is our ability to have an honest conversation is a starting point. And I think some of that work kind of goes back for me to 2008, and I think that was, very much connected to what was happening in the Middle East, and that was that sort of first time that people had to be evacuated out of Lebanon and out of Israel. And I just started my career. I just finished my master's in conflict resolution and peace building, and I was having lunch very peacefully in the lunchroom until my boss, who at the time, I don't know if you remember, Rabbi Freeling, came to me in the lunchroom and says, "What are we going to do about the Middle East?" And my first reaction was one of being very startled, but also being terrified, because I escaped the Middle East because I thought I was coming to this place of, Christian identity, right? That was sort of the thought and the understanding. And that sort of put me on this path of truly understanding being a global city, being a city where we have the largest diaspora communities outside their native countries anywhere. Guess what? Anything that happens around the world, we are impacted in LA. And the only way that we're going to be able to move forward as a people of Los Angeles is then our ability to be able to have the honest conversations. And a lot of times, those conversations happen behind closed doors in privacy. The first time I convened the Middle East Advisory Task Force, there was a lot of trepidation and fear that went into it. I mean, this work, I'm just going to be honest. I mean, for every step forward, you take 10 back. And sort of going into it with that full recognition I didn't have high expectations. I thought instead of the clashes in the streets and sort of the political posturing and the lack of civility in discourse, we can have something different. And so when we convened the Middle East Advisory Task Force, that was, I want to say 2005, 2006, and I'm dating myself here. I was very young. I didn't have much expectations, but we did bring in the room, Jewish and Christian and Muslim, but also brought in those who have experience and expertise in peace building. And what I thought was going to be a couple of meetings lasted for 3 years. And what was, for me, sort of that turning moment is that, yes, as a city entity, and at the time I was with the Human Relations, we convened the sort of core group. But what we did really is we gave them an opportunity to talk to each other in ways that they otherwise wouldn't have. We didn't do anything publicly. But I was flat out told, I will not sit in the room across so-and-so. I was flat out told as we were convening. But because it's a city convening, we will come to this meeting, right? But what that did, it's a face saving. It gives people an opportunity to sit in the room, and out of that grew a lot of organic efforts that I would have never thought or imagined. And some of those organic efforts that grew out are now their own organizations building dialogue and conversation and truly looking at what it means for us to have a way forward. So it's very difficult work, but it's what gives me hope. It's what gives me a sense that I am not standing idly by, but rather actively doing something that is going to, at the very least, allow us to remove these sort of labels that we consistently and constantly place on each other. And once we're able to do that, it's a different conversation. Because we can talk about anti-Semitism, and it is real. Let's not sugarcoat it. We can talk about Islamophobia. We can talk about persecution of Christianity. These things are real. But unless we can be in the room with that reality and with the hard question, how do we move forward? But not only how do we move forward, how do we work with our own communities to move forward? And this is where working with people like Bishop Taylor and so many of our other faith leaders, I mean, they're the ones who are doing the heavy lifting. I'm just sort of there to create the space, if you will. In the city of LA, we've established the Day of Religious Pluralism. And that came out because of what was happening both in Europe and the Middle East. And it was a formal resolution that went through City Council, in the sense that in Los Angeles, it doesn't matter what religion, what political affiliation. We all exist in this place together, and because of that existence together, it is a responsibility and an opportunity to build a different reality and hopefully project a different future for the world. More recently, within the last couple of months, I think you were there, Bishop Taylor, we did the Human Security Resolution. These are outcomes of those very quiet conversations. And I'll tell you at times that were very difficult. I can't tell you the number of times people walked away from the table. It becomes very difficult. But can we look at common core values like freedom of worship and freedom of expression, freedom from want and freedom from fear? I think we can all agree on those constructs, right? And that was the Human Security Resolution that was passed in City Council. And that didn't come easy. It took a couple of years to get to that point. And so I'm kind of sharing all of that to say that this room, these kinds of conversations are helpful. Christians in the Middle East, and now I'm putting my personal hat on, for the longest time, they look to the West as though what happens to Christianity in the West, because Christians in the Middle East are not only drowning, but they're being erased as an identity and as a people. And so that was always sort of the question. And so for me, coming here, having my family, having my traditions, I go to church every Sunday. My kids serve at church every Sunday. That is powerful for me. And because I have that privilege, it is important for me to contribute so that others have that same opportunity to freely worship and to freely be a neighbor and to protect one another. Can we start at those points? And then as I look at the bleak picture that you painted, Iyad, my heart just aches. And I truly don't know, and I don't think any of us have the answers, quite frankly. The only thing I know is I can't stand idly by. Yeah. And I'm not standing alone. And there are people like Bishop Taylor, and there are people like my fellow panelists and all of you in this room. I think we can make a difference.
Thank you, Joumana. Just lovely. So Canon Bill, speaking of freedom of expression, I sense you're a bit of a news hound when it comes to news from the region you know so well. We have a lot of choices in where we get our news from the region. Which ones do you trust, and which would you recommend to us?
This is going to be a bit of a bombshell. I first look at the BBC. That's my first. My second is Al Jazeera. And then my third is NPR. That's my personal. I really want to hear differing positions. I want to interact with people who disagree with me, who have different agendas. How else am I going to learn anything? And frankly, I have a wonderful friend who's since died, who also lived his whole life in the Middle East, said, we don't have news in America, we have infotainment. Okay, it's not for me to criticize, but you're not going to get information which isn't wanted to be heard, if I can use that term. That's how you sell advertising. An agency that produces news which is not based on profit is more trustable. So that to me is kind of the bottom line. But the other one, frankly, is your own personal echo chamber. Okay? Please, don't limit yourself to your own personal echo chamber. Also, interact with individuals who think differently, who come from a different background, who have different values. Be challenged, because that's the only way you'll grow and learn. We go all the way back to Jesus and the apostles. He got together these 12 guys who never agreed on anything, especially about who's more important. In their learning through him and each other, here we are. That's how God works. So please, 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 don't limit yourself. Expand yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Canon Bill. So I'm about to ask a question of Canon Iyad, and after he answers, I'm going to take my microphone and come out among you and bring it to those who might want to raise your hands and pose a question to any or all of our panelists. So be thinking about what you'd like to ask any or all of them, and then raise your hand so I can bring the mic to you to enable everybody to hear you, and also to enable those who listen to this later to hear your question. Canon Iyad, another of the values that Joumana articulated is freedom of religion, which, at least for now, we take for granted in the United States. I think about the pilgrim experience, most Fridays being near the Damascus Gate, St. George's Cathedral and Guest House, seeing people from East Jerusalem and the West Bank going to prayer at the Al-Aqsa Mosque on Friday. What does that scene look like in the current political context?
I would like to give an example. Exactly this week was the first week of the month of Ramadan, you know? And as you know, it's one of the 5 pillars of Islam. So it's a very, very important pillar for fasting. And it's very important for Muslims to go and pray at what Jews or Israeli call them the Temple Mount. So it's the Dome of the Rock, Al-Aqsa Mosque, Haram al-Sharif. So it has 3 names. And to give you an idea, Israel made a law that anyone, men, they have to be over 55 years old to go to pray, women 50 years, and anyone under 12 years old. Can you imagine what kind of frustration and anger this is doing? And this is only for the ones who live in East Jerusalem. And you have to understand that East Jerusalem is part of the West Bank, west of the Jordan River, which Israel don't want to recognize as, because it's one city for Israel, it's the internal capital, and they don't call the West Bank anymore, they want to change it to Samaria and Judea, and it's already on the news these days, right? So imagine to come from Ramallah or to come from Bethlehem, they close the checkpoints completely and they're not allowing anyone to cross over. Imagine Palestinians depend on working in Israel, so all these workers, they're not allowed to come and work in Israel. They need permits, and those permits are always hard to obtain or get. Like for you, some of you came to St. George's Cathedral, and if you remember our cook, his name is Muhammad, you know? And Muhammad comes from Bethlehem area, and guess what? The church helps him to get the permit. But I was told recently, it's not easy to get those permits anymore. I don't know what's gonna happen to Muhammad. So imagine. And for Muhammad, he cannot spend the night in Jerusalem. Imagine, it's only 7 miles. So they made a law that you come in the morning, but you have to come back in the afternoon. And there's a special way. You put your thumb to check out, you put your thumb to check in. So for some people, they barely made their living. And to make them do such thing, you can imagine the burden that's happening on them. And so Muslims are not having freedom of prayers. Same thing happens to the Christians who live in the West Bank or in Bethlehem area. Imagine when you want to go on Christmas to Jerusalem and you're not allowed to do that. So everybody's treated equally when it comes under occupation. So occupation is the word. How can you remove the word occupation? And that's when we have some stability in the Middle East. It's stop the occupation. By doing that, that's when we have peace all over the Middle East.
So I'm wandering around looking for a question, and I haven't seen a hand go up yet, so I'm going to pose a question. Oh, no. Mine was going to be provocative and take some time, so I'm going to come in this direction. Excuse me. Fire away. Why don't you stand up so they can see you?
Yeah, hi, George Abu Hamid. I relate to Joumana because I grew up in Damascus, Syria, and we came to the U.S. as teenagers as well. Growing up, we did experience any discrimination as Christians. We were treated equally as the Muslims. Unfortunately, what's going on in Syria is a little different with Al-Qaeda, with the help of the U.S., took over the Syrian regime recently, back in December 7th of last year. Now, my question to Joumana, as far as the human resolution you talked about in LA, I kind of smirk when I hear that because I remember what happened to the student protests and encampment at UCLA, how they got attacked by 300 thugs that descended from Beverly Hills, and they got away with it. What happened to the USC students as well, and other institutions, how the LAPD violently removed these protesters. The question is, that's run in conflict with the human resolution you talked about, also run contrary to the First Amendment right of free speech, the one you said we're able to exercise here, including worship. How are you going to reconcile the two together?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And there technical answer to your question. First of all, UCLA and college campuses have their own parameters and regulations. That's not anything that the city has any purview over. That being said, Even within the context of protest, there is time, place, and manner. Even in the context of protest, there's time, place, and manner. So there are parameters, right, to protest and freedom of speech. The human security resolution I spoke about is something that's been in the works for 2 years, and that came post the protests, and not only on university campuses, also in neighborhoods. We were seeing those protests that were happening in neighborhoods. There were a lot of conversations in terms of how do you preserve free speech, maintain civility, and safety and security for everybody. And with this human security resolution, this was the product of very difficult conversations. It took 2 years for us to get to the point when you would think that that's a given, right? Freedom of speech, these are a given. And so, were there things that could have been done differently? Absolutely. Were there things that could be done differently in the future? Absolutely. I can't speak for college campuses. The only thing I can speak for is that balancing freedom of speech with safety and security is paramount. Because without civility in discourse, it's just a screaming match.
Excuse me. I'm Debbie Bamberger, and despite my advanced age, I spend my day with 8 and 9-year-olds. I'm a 3rd grade teacher. And so how this all affects our children, in the world, is really important to me. And I'm wondering if any of you or all of you could speak to any efforts that you're aware of, the kinds of things that make it into a 60 minutes, story, but something that's being done on the ground. Are you aware of any efforts to bridge the prejudices, the discrimination, that line from South Pacific, I think it is, you have to be carefully taught. And I run into this in my own classroom in Glendale. So it takes, when we leave it alone, the separatism, that's the default setting, even right here, at least in my experience. So I'm sure there are people of good faith and of all in your various areas of expertise, and I'm wondering if you might share any hopeful news.
I don't want to hog the microphone.
Can I just, very quickly, in Iraq, public schools are, of course, neighborhood-oriented. And so what you end up with is the Shiite kids going to school with Shiite kids and Sunni kids going, because they're neighborhood-based. St. George's of Baghdad started a preschool based on a kind of babysitting, if I might say, for people who worked in the area. And so you got Shia, Sunni, Christians, even a Yazidi in the preschool. And the parents came back to the Anglican Church, St. George, and said, we want you to do a school. So now there's a primary school. And it's the only one in the country that children of different backgrounds interact with each other, learn to get along with each other, how to resolve conflict together, as children do, but they also learn what they need to learn to get on in life. And it's the only one in the country, and it's Anglican.
I want to add something. Just recently you had the Academy Award. Academy Award, you call it? And one movie or a good documentary, I think it was No Other Land. And for me what was shocking is when the Jewish guy addressed his Muslim partner with producing the movie, when he said, my brother. It gave me goosebumps. I think we need more of that. And I was told that there are challenges now, even who's going to distribute that movie. And so I think the more we get more people to show this, I think that's how we make peace. And I loved what, I forgot his name, honestly, I wasn't prepared to talk about it, but the Jewish guy, when he said, this government is not the right one to follow, I'm sorry? Yes. Yuval, yeah, Abraham. But, I mean, he said that about your government, that it's not the right one that's going to help to make peace or put this together. Another thing, don't forget, we do have movements in Jerusalem like Women in Black. You know, women do so much, and they march every Friday at 4 o'clock near the prime minister's. I'm talking about Jewish women, Jewish. They want to end the occupation, people. I talk about Miko Peled, the general's son. He's a superhero for me. I mean, the man, his father was a famous general that fought for Israel, and he was taught the wrong things, and he's addressing his father, why did you raise me that way? So I highly recommend some things like that. And just recently, I don't know if you knew, some bookstore, and some of you visited my cousins there. I mean, it was so stupid. Anything that had a Palestinian flag, even if it was a cookbook, they had to confiscate, you know? I mean, so the people who raided the store, they didn't know how to read English, that's one. But the beauty, the next day or the third day, I went to check on them. They're my friends. I mean, you know, it's a Muslim family that everybody knows, you know? And it was amazing. It tells me, yeah, the best thing for us was the solidarity we received from all these diplomats, consulates. I mean, that was the best thing they did. And so we need more and more of people like you to support such people. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop. John Connolly, St. Thomas, Hollywood. Given that there are two gigantic crises in the Palestinian areas, the complete destruction of Gaza as a place where people can actually live, and the new offensive in the West Bank by the right-wing settlers to try to seize more and more territory. Is there any hope at all in two things? First, what has to be done to revive and grow again the Christian communities in these areas? And secondly, is there any realistic hope of rebuilding Gaza, which has been completely and utterly devastated, and stopping the expansion of seizures in the West Bank? Because as I see it now, where this is pointing is a wholesale destruction of the Palestinian peoples and the robbery of all of their remaining lands.
I want to just I have to go to this point so you understand what's happening. In 1993, Oslo Agreement was signed. Most of you heard about. Rabin was the prime minister. Yasser Arafat was the president. And it was to gradually give up the West Bank so that we can have a viable state next to the state of Israel. Sorry to use the word stupid. The stupidity, what they did, instead of making a deal completely, they divided the West Bank into 3 areas. Area A, 21% of the West Bank. Again, you can come back here and take a look at it. Area B, 18%. And imagine the 60% is under Israeli control. So from the beginning, there was no intention to follow up with such thing, to have a viable state next to the state of Israel. Number 2, if you look carefully about the map, you're going to see how close Gaza Strip is to the West Bank. How can you have a viable state by not having an international airport or port? You need to connect with the world to have such thing. But what happened is 2009, a man by the name of Benjamin Netanyahu came in power, and the man destroyed every single dream to have such thing called Palestine next to the state of Israel. That's my personal opinion, personal. And he allowed money to be funneled into Gaza to make the Palestinian National Authority weak, and he managed to do that. So the only way to keep the Christians, to answer your question, again, it's 2 words: stop the occupation. How can you stop the occupation? Because Israel, I always say it, there's a gutter of dollars are poured into Israel. Israel is nothing, people, without the United States of America. You know it, and I know it, and everyone knows it. But how can you put pressure on your own government by saying, stop building settlements? You know, Oslo Agreement was signed in 1993 with 300 to 400,000 settlers. Today, it tripled. So instead of making things easy, they made it worse. And it's as simple as pouring oil on fire. And that's what they did. So the only way to do it, one more time, stop expansion of settlements. They're going to do annexations. And there's recently, and I maybe I'm wrong, but I think there's a famous woman named Miriam Edelson. Edelson she's a mega donor, as you call them. And her request was, I will help you to run for the presidency as long as you annex the West Bank. And that's what's happening. And lastly, if I may, if you make calculation, there's 7 million Jews that live in Israel versus 2 million Palestinians in Israel proper from 48 to 67. In the West Bank, there are 4 million. In Gaza Strip, let's say 2 million. People, if you make the calculation, we already exceed the Jewish people. So I believe it's a way how to get rid of more people, and that's where Trump comes with the idea, we need to move them. They don't care about, just leave us alone, and they want to rebuild Gaza, and it will be rebuilt, trust me. If Israel will say, Israel wants to be controlled. How are you going to build it if Israel don't bring the bulldozers inside? Why nobody's putting pressure on Israel? Hamas did terrible things, but what about the terrible things they're doing? Why would you fly a Jewish baby and Biden hugs her? Great. What about the thousands that got killed that nobody mentions about that are Palestinian? Aren't we human beings? Why Israel is always above the law, people? I wish I know the answer. I guide only Americans. And I wish once I know the answer. I cannot get it, people. And I love when you come to my country and say, yeah, what do you think? Is Democrat better than Republican? It's the same. Nothing has changed. For you, you come here. When Obama was here, the people thought, oh, he's not a good president. He's your president, for God's sake. And you know what? Trump is your president, and we have nothing to hide about it. And with Trump, and I shared it with Bishop John Taylor. If you Google the word Gish Gallop, I learned it just recently. Gish Gallop, Gish Gallop, Gallopp.
This is very cool.
Gallup, and it gives you exactly what President Trump is. I mean, I was shocked when I Googled that word, I was talking to a woman that organizing the pilgrimage in Pennsylvania, and she was talking about the situation in here, and she said, we have this president that is Gish galloping. And I'm going, what is this word? But Google it, and then you know.
Joumana, Bill, does either of you wish to offer perspective on Gaza and the situation there? If not, Bruce is standing by. Joumana?
I mean, the only thing I'll say, and thank you so much for just being so raw and for bringing this forward. I mean, when I look at history and when I think of humanity, unfortunately, what we are seeing is just, it's just gut-wrenching, right? The only thing I'll say, and the only distinction, and I think you started to sort of talk about it a little bit, Iyad, and that is the distinction between state actors and the people. And oftentimes, it's finding the people and finding the voices and finding the allyship who are truly willing to do the hard work, because this is not easy work, right? And when we look at democracy and we understand constructs of democracy, and I know we didn't get into the political conversation in terms of the lack of structures and democracies in the Middle East, which really just sort of contributed tremendously to the demise of the people, whether they're Christians or otherwise. When you bring down institutions and structures of government, you have no governance. It's not about a president. It's about the institutions and how those institutions, it's about democracy, and it's the people who bring about democracy. And so there is a lot of power in that. And I do want to at least make that distinction between state actors, between democracy and democratic institutions, and the people that actually make that democracy. We break it down that way, I think you'll find more voices and more people who are willing to be allies to speak out for humanity and humanitarian causes.
Thank you, Joumana. Our final question is from Bruce. Please stand.
I'd just like to circle back just for a moment. Maybe this can be the second to last question. Debbie Bamberger, your question. There's a model for schools in Israel that exists. It's small, but it's robust, called Hand in Hand. So I recommend anybody to just Google Hand in Hand schools, and you can see something that could inspire a wider thing. Iyad, perhaps you know about that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, definitely.
So we do have room for one more question. I understand. Aha, coming your way. Da-da-da-da.
Yeah, my name is Najla Saman. I was born in Syria, but we have Palestinian heritage. And my question to you is, every time there is atrocity against the Israeli, if we go back and we could see that it is related to occupation. I mean, I just want to put an example for you. If your really city, let's say Texas, is occupied for 7 years, what do you do to really get rid of the occupation? And also, I want to bring the Christian of America, the evangelical Christian, which advocate for a bigger Israeli state in the West Bank also. So it's not really that Christians are getting it from inside Palestine, but there's also really presentation of Christian in front of the Muslim. It's very dangerous and it's very scary. So I'm just wanting to know, what do you do to really counter-effect all these issues?
Thank you so much. A wonderful closing question. Thank you.
Can I just say that it's really important for people who know better to speak truth. Speak truth. There is, unfortunately, a whole tradition in Western Christianity which is based on prophecy and stuff like that, which is theologically corrupt and bankrupt. But the fact is, it is very popular, and most people listen to it, they hear it, and it becomes what we all believe. And it's really unpopular to stand up and say, A, that's not biblical. You need to read the Bible yourself, not just listen to what you're told, and read what's there, not what people put into it. It's unpopular. And you're going to be called anti-Semitic. And there's going to be real issues. But the only way that we're going to counteract this kind of nebulous, generic Christian support for expanding Israel and the settlements so that real Jews can live in the Holy Land, etc. I was telling Iyad, when I first went to Egypt in 1972 and started learning Arabic, I had a wonderful Arabic teacher, an older gentleman, Muslim. And he asked me, as a young American, he said, what do you Americans think about this business with Israel? And I said, they needed somewhere to live. Europe kicked them out. And he said, you Americans are wonderful people. You're so generous. Why didn't you give them New Jersey? It's the same idea. It's not a land without people for a people with no land. That is a myth that was created to justify horrendous things. And we need to stand up and say. So that's the answer to Sorry, that's my answer to your question.
So would you please thank our panelists once again?
Thank you.
This is a two-part presentation separated by dinner, which is now served. It'll probably take us about 20 minutes to get through the buffet line. The only opinion I have about who goes first is that it ought to be the panelists.
Yes.
And Pilgrim Kelly Grace Kurtz is going to say grace.
The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. God of peace and justice, we pray for the people of Syria, Iraq, Palestine, Israel, and all who suffer in this violent world today. We pray for peace and the laying down of weapons. We pray for all those who fear for tomorrow, that your spirit of comfort would draw near to them. We pray for those with power over war or peace, for wisdom, discernment, and compassion to guide their decisions. Above all, we pray for all your precious children at risk and in fear, that you would hold and protect them. God of hope and life, we ask you to surround Iyad's son Sammy and his wife as they prepare to be parents. Fill this little girl's lungs with your holy air, her heart with your holy love, and her mind with your creativity and determination. We ask that this meal be a blessing to our bodies, our minds, and our spirits, so that we can continue to be who you would have us be throughout all the world, cousins, one another. We pray in the name of Jesus, the Prince of Peace. Amen.
Amen.
Enjoy your dinners. We'll be back about 6:15.